Hey, thanks for checking out Deep Waters Project. My name is Taylor Moore, and I'm the founder and co-author of the Deep Waters Process. We created this journal with one purpose in mind: to grow your love for Jesus through learning how to study the Bible effectively. Let's face it, studying the Bible can be really daunting. Where do I start? How do I find that one passage that's going to speak into my life exactly where I am right now? Why do I feel unproductive when I do jump in? Our Deep Waters Process will give one dependable, reliable structure that you know you can turn to, and your time in the Word will be deep, productive, and even life-changing. If you're trying it out for the first time and you're feeling a little bit nervous about it, we strongly recommend you do so with a friend or two. We found that when you hit a roadblock, often another person's ideas will be the breakthrough you need to see something you just couldn't see by yourself. So let's jump into the process and let's see how it works. 3 initial steps before anything else. The first is to find a quiet, distraction-free place to just be still with the Lord and listen to what He wants to tell you. Second is to choose between 2 to 5 verses to study for the day. I wouldn't go more than that. You will be shocked. 2 is often plenty. After you've chosen those, step 3, take a few moments, pray, and invite the Lord into your time in the Word. If at any point you forgot what we talked about today, these instructions are all in the opening section of each journal. So if you look at a blank process page, the goal of every session is to complete both the left and right page and to go in order. One section will inform the next. Step 1, content. Briefly summarize each individual verse in your own words. Before anything else, we first need to ensure that we understand what the verses are saying, and we can do this by simply rephrasing them in our own words, and we want to do each verse independently. We're going to use Philippians 4 verses 8 and 9 as our example. Let's read these first. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Starting with verse 8, there are many ways to rephrase this, but the simplest I could think of was think life-giving thoughts. True, noble, right, lovely, admirable. To me, these all fit under that bucket of life-giving, and so that's what I personally went with. For the second verse, verse 9, my rephrase was, God will be with you when you do what you've learned from me. I'm not adding meaning, I'm not extracting anything crazy from it, just keeping it simple and rephrasing each verse. Step 2, observations. What stands out when you read the text? When you make your first pass through these verses, this is a place to jot down any and all thoughts that jump out at you. What do you see happening here? What's going on? What questions do you have in the text? What's God or man saying or doing that intrigues you? Is there anything surprising happening? In this passage, things that I noted were that Paul wants the Philippians to practice everything they've seen him model for them. This was Paul's final statement to them on how to live as believers in Jesus. Usually the last thing you say is the biggest thing you want someone to remember, so this must be important. And last, it feels like this list is so long that maybe Paul isn't suggesting thoughts that only pertain to these buckets, but he's trying to get them to wrap their heads around the positive categories on which one's thoughts should rest. This intermediary step of jotting down any notes we feel are important will help us bridge the gap into the next section, which is where we really start to get into the meat of it. Step 3, principles. What truths about God and or man do you learn from these verses? Whether you believe it or not, every verse in the Bible contains truths about God and His character or man and our relationship with God. With that in mind, our goal in this section is to pull out timeless truths and principles about God and or man by answering these 3 questions. What do I learn about God's character? What do I learn about man's relationship to God? And what do I learn about myself and or mankind? So in these 2 verses, here are 5 possible principles while knowing that there are many, many more. And as a side note, you should always get to at least 3. If you can't, keep praying and reading until you find them. So here are my 5. Godly thoughts are true, noble, right, pure, lovely, and admirable. My thought life is important. If He's telling me to think about these things, then it must be vital for me to control my thoughts. I feel God's nearness when my thoughts align with His. I play a role in controlling my thoughts. Peace comes from God directly. He makes it clear that God is a God of peace, and He is near when my thoughts align with His. Again, this is just a handful. If you spend a good deal of time here, I'll bet you could find at least 10 on these 2 verses alone. And this is why choosing only 2 to 5 verses is absolutely plenty. Step 4, key principle. Which principle sticks out the most to you? When you go through all of these principles, which one really stands out to you as one that you would want to dive into deeper, or simply felt like it was really the crux of what those verses were getting at? The beauty of this process is that you could go through these same verses a year from now and come up with vastly different principles based on what's impacting you while reading. When I did this, the principle that really hit me was I play a role in controlling my thoughts. I felt like that's where I needed to spend the rest of my time in this study. Write that principle down in a yellow box for easy referral in the future. Step 5, supporting scripture. What other scripture supports that principle? Here's the deal. Our minds can be a bit outlandish at times, and we might see something in the word that truthfully isn't there or just isn't true, but we think it is at first glance. It is vitally important that we take our key principle and find other scriptures that would definitively validate that it is indeed true. When you do this, try to look in other sections of the Bible and other writers or speakers. So if you're reading the words of Paul, maybe go to the Gospels. Look for words of Jesus and possibly even the Old Testament. Now, if you're new to the Bible, this can feel crazy daunting, and it can be. But this is where the resource of Google is absolutely helpful. I could search something like verses about controlling my thoughts and find others that speak to that subject. If you start searching for that principle and even Google is struggling to find other verses that support it, it might be worth considering if that principle is indeed true. For these verses, I found Romans 12 verse 2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. If we're talking about our thought life, this verse says that perfectly. We shouldn't be thinking about the things the world thinks about, but our minds should be overhauled and our thoughts should change with it. Try to find at least 2 other verses to support your principle if you can. You will also start to read and know many other parts of the Bible through this process too, which is really exciting. Step 6, application. What questions will help you examine your own behavior? This step, in my opinion, is the most pivotal and possibly life-changing section of the process. If you give this time, you will be changed. It may be in small ways or sometimes large ways, but you will be thinking differently as you go through your day. There's no better way to probe the content of your heart than to ask yourself a challenging question, especially when it's a who, what, when, where, why, or how question, and not a simple yes or no question. What are some questions that relate to the key principle that you could ask that will really help you challenge yourself and allow the Lord to speak to you? For the principle, I play a role in controlling my thoughts, here are some questions that I came up with that I know if I were to answer and be vulnerable, I'd be revealing some deep stuff in my heart. Where do I currently find myself thinking impure and ungodly thoughts? What media am I watching or consuming that is filling my head with the wrong thoughts? Why am I choosing to gorge on negative sources of thoughts instead of life-giving ones? What proactive steps must I take to cut out the negative influences in my life? Writing these questions can be challenging at first, and this is where trying this process first with a friend can be a goldmine. You may ask one question, which may lead a friend to come up with another, which may inspire you to come up with another. In practice, this is exactly what we see happening all the time when we host seminars and classes to teach this process. Try to get at least 3 questions, but you'll probably get many more than that. Don't beat yourself up when you're trying this for the first time and even the second time. Give yourself a few sessions first, push yourself, and give yourself grace as you start retooling your mind to think about the scriptures at that deeper level. This was the hardest part of the process. The rest is just allowing the Lord to do His work. Step 7, reflection. What is your honest answer to one of the application questions? When you go through all the questions that you've written, choose one that you really feel that internal tension when you read it. Allow yourself to dive in, really think about it. Write your thoughts down knowing that this is between you and the Lord. Allow yourself to share what you're feeling or thinking and put it on paper. This process is often very therapeutic, and you will someday look back on this and see clearly how the Lord was working. For me, I answered the question, why am I choosing to gorge on negative sources of thoughts instead of life-giving ones? And my answer talked about the temptation to watch YouTube and Netflix, even though I act differently and in a negative way when I do so, versus investing my mental energy in life-giving sources. You can see my full answer on the reflection page in the journal. Step 8, call to action. What revelation will you take away from this passage? After going through all of these steps, discovering principles, writing the questions, answering one of them, what are you taking away from this time in the Word that will stick with you in the hours, days, and months to come? For me, I felt a call to control the consumption of media that negatively affects my thoughts, knowing that my thoughts play a key role in my well-being, my self-talk, and my view of others. It's my responsibility to stay disciplined in what I watch and how I think for the sake of myself, my wife, my kids, and my community. This is just one example of where this single principle took me, and if I had chosen a different principle, the last 4 sections of the process would have probably landed in a totally different place, which is why this process can be so effective and you can pull so much out of just a few verses. I hope that this gave you enough guidance to start jumping in and studying on your own or with a small group. If you still have questions, please email me at hello@deepwatersproject.com and I'll be more than happy to provide any help that I can. Thanks for watching. Please consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and leaving a comment with your thoughts on the process, and I will see you in upcoming videos.